And we're back, still wearing the green, because we're talking about a man who loved his culture enough to want to see it flourish and grow. Yeah, welcome to the Alyosha Society, friends. In the last video, we talked a lot about how to pursue truth and beauty and goodness, didn't we? Through great literature, pulling out these universal themes, measuring them up next to scripture, and then finding very specific ways to apply them to our lives. This is video number 8. So in this video, you should have read books 15 and 16. And so in this video, friends, I want to do really kind of something similar to what we did in the previous video, except instead of those adventures that Odysseus went through, the weaving, the Cyclops, the sirens, all those fun, cool stories, we're going to talk about weaving. Weaving. Now, I want to talk about weaving in the Odyssey, but I want to talk about weaving in general. Because, friends, weaving is one of those, I might call it ubiquitous. That's a good word to know. Look it up. Ubiquitous means it's everywhere. You can't get away from it. And when I say weaving is a sort of ubiquitous theme in literature, what I mean is it comes up over and not just Homer. Anytime an author, a storyteller is talking about weaving, they usually are referring not just to, someone who's doing some cross stitch or knitting. What I don't know, sewing. I'm not a knitter. I'm not a weaver. Usually the author is talking about something deeper than actual physical weaving, although that is what's going on in the story, but it points to something a little deeper than that. Do you remember in your studies of Greek mythology, there are these 3 beings called the Fates? And the Greeks and the Romans believed that they controlled basically everything related to life and death. So, and the imagery they used was, well, one of the Fates would, pull out the yarn. One of the Fates would measure the yarn. Ooh, I wonder how long it should be. And then the other one would snippy snips. The other one would snip it off. And they believed that whenever the Fates decided to snip that thread, that is a symbol of the end of your life. That's when you die. So they've decided, well, let's see, Mr. Etter, we're going to let him live to be 85 years old. So when I turn 85, whenever the time is right, the 3 Fates are going to pull out that yarn and measure it, and then they're going to snip it, and then I'm going to die. So the Greeks and the Romans were they were a little bit terrified of the Fates. Think about it. They control the most important thing we have, our own lives. So in the Odyssey, Homer is using this image of weaving to point to higher realities that have to do with fate and life and death and who is actually in control of those things. So here's something that's extremely cool. The name Penelope actually means weaver. So what that means is that in some way or another, Penelope is the ultimate weaver. But again, we're not just talking about, making a baby blanket here, guys. We're talking about she is the one who is ultimately has the character and the deep love for Odysseus to bring him back home in a symbolic sense, to weave him back home. Do you understand what I mean by that? I'm kind of talking in deeper terms here. I don't mean that she literally, made a blanket and then that magically made Odysseus come home. What I mean is that she is the top weaver in that, because she has the highest character and she is the most beautiful woman and the greatest weaver of all. And when I say beautiful, I mean outside and inside. The other weavers cannot keep up with her. And in a sense, you might even say her cunning her cunning ways and her love for Odysseus draw him back home. If that doesn't make a lot of sense, just hear me out. I already talked about the three fates. So in the Odyssey, there are several weavers, and they're all women. What I believe Homer is doing here is something that is really fascinating and beautiful and adds tremendous depth to this great work of literature. And he is setting these three women up almost as if they're in a contest. Each of them gets to have their shot at getting Odysseus, at, weaving the fates in such a way that he'll stay with them. But who's going to win in the end? Oh, you see how that works. Now, let's look at some questions. First of all, we're going to ask the question, does that woman weave? Now, friends, this is going to get a little complicated because what I'm saying here is that all three of them were weavers. Actually, literally. You may have missed it. It may have only been one line in the story, but the story actually says that all three of these women were weaving at the loom at some point or another. Physically, literally, but I believe that the weaving is more symbolic. Now, some of these questions may seem a little odd, but when we go over them, you'll understand where I'm going. Is that woman beautiful both externally and internally? I want to talk about animals. Again, I know that seems odd. How does that woman desire to weave things in such a way when it comes to men in their life, and particularly Odysseus? And ultimately, what does this weaver have to offer Odysseus? If she wants to, control the fates and control the actions and lives of people, what is it that woman ultimately has to offer? And who's going to win the weaving contest in the end? So here we go. First question. Well, they're all three weaving, as you can see. But Penelope, why is Penelope weaving? Remember, she's weaving because she's deceiving the suitors. She's telling them, hey guys, I promise I'll marry one of you, blah, 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 as soon as I finish weaving this death shroud for Laertes, the father of Odysseus. Well, of course, she's tricking them because she's unweaving everything that she did during the day. She's unweaving it at night. She is the woman of many ways, just like Odysseus is the man in many ways. But is Calypso weaving? Yes, literally and figuratively, but she wants to weave all of the details of life in such a way that Odysseus stays with her and forgets about his wife and settles down with her. Circe's doing the same thing. But really quickly, before we move to the next question, this is important. Penelope, what might the symbolism be of the fact that she's weaving a death shroud? Now, if she's continuing to weave the death shroud, then what does that mean? Now, guys, I'm speaking symbolically here. You gotta put on your swimmies because we're gonna kind of swim out to the deep end a little bit. As long as she's weaving, figuratively speaking, Laertes is not dying. You see that? He's not dying, because if he dies, then she has to quickly finish the death shroud because he would have to be buried in it. So in a sense, Penelope is weaving out the life of Laertes, Odysseus' father, in a sense, symbolically speaking, keeping him alive longer. Well, what does that mean? Well, in the ancient world, fathers and sons were always connected in terms of their identity. So if she is symbolically extending the life of Laertes, she is also, in a sense, extending the life of Odysseus, which means, in a beautiful symbolic way, Penelope is weaving Odysseus back home to herself, keeping him from getting killed, keeping him from losing his life, tricking the suitors, saying no to them, being faithful to her husband. Is that not really beautiful? And remember, her name literally means weaver, but she's a weaver on many different levels. Is she beautiful? Well, yeah, because of this, Penelope is beautiful on the outside. She's a physically beautiful woman, but because she has true love for her husband Odysseus, she is beautiful on the inside. She is trying to be faithful to her husband, even though he's been gone for 20 years, and all these suitors want to marry her, and she might have even been justified in marrying one of them. But she is, in a sense, she's really sort of like the ultimate example of womanhood. I think Homer is putting that. Well, the problem with Calypso and Circe is they are Penelope wannabes. You see that? They're beautiful on the outside, but they're ugly on the inside. They don't have internal beauty like Peter talks about in the New Testament. Oh, they've got the lipstick and the makeup, they've got the jewelry and the flash and the glitz and the glitter, but they're ugly on the inside, which means they are fake weavers. They are fake Penelopes. They are, in a sense, Penelope wannabes. Now, the animals, I think, are very interesting in the story. What is Homer doing? Bear with me. You may have to pause and rewind the video, and this one is kind of, but it's worth paying attention. It's really a fascinating thing I believe Homer's doing here. Back in Ithaca, where Penelope is dealing with the suitors, she, of course, has animals because that's how people lived. Rich people had flocks. They had goats, and they had pigs, and they had cattle, and they lived. Okay, they made clothing from the sheep's wool. They ate the meat from the cattle and the pigs, and they made leather from the hides. So the flocks, the animals represented wealth and just daily living. If you didn't have them, then you might starve, you might die. You wouldn't have clothing or food. So back in Ithaca, the men, the suitors, are eating up all of Odysseus's flocks. They're just, it's like having unwanted guests in your house. Well, Penelope has 110 of them, and they're cleaning out her fridge, and they're depleting the size of the flocks. They're eating up the cattle and the goats and the sheep. So the number of men in Ithaca is 110, but the number of animals is decreasing. But here's the thing: the men are acting like animals. So men who act like animals are increasing, and the actual animal numbers are decreasing. So it's doing this. I don't believe this question really ties into Calypso, so I'm going to skip over to Circe. Now, notice this kind of mirror image that Homer sets up with between Circe and Penelope. Circe is turning Odysseus's men into animals, so the number of men is depleting while the number of animals is increasing. You see, the very opposite of what's going on in Ithaca. Because in Ithaca, the number of animals is decreasing, the number of men who act like animals is increasing. And watch it. Here's the really cool part. Because Penelope is tricking them, she's making them look foolish and stupid like a dumb animal. You see that? So Penelope is turning men into animals using her mind, her wit, her wisdom, her cunning ways. She doesn't need magic. Circe can only do it with magic. And she's doing, in a sense, sort of the mirror image or the opposite of what Penelope's doing. Why? I believe because Homer is saying that Circe is a wannabe weaver. She's not the real deal. And the same with Calypso. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Isn't that awesome? Now, how do they relate to men? Penelope relates to men appropriately. But Mr. Eder, she must have flirted with them when she said, I'll marry one. No. No, guys, these men were dangerous and threatening. They were threatening her son. She was right to deceive them. She was right. Now, we don't have time. We could have a whole discussion and argument about when is it okay to deceive someone and so forth. I know the Bible says you should not give false testimony against your neighbor. I know, but it's more complicated than that. I believe that Penelope was justified in deceiving them. But Calypso behaves inappropriately towards men. She just wants to have a sexual encounter. She just wants to have, fulfill her lust, her lustful feelings. And Circe is the same, the wicked sorceress. They're both beautiful. They're both attractive. And you can see how a man like Odysseus might be lured to them. But they are behaving inappropriately towards a man who is not their husband. They are Penelope wannabes. They will never be as beautiful and as pure, and they will never have the character that Penelope has. Finally, what do they offer? Well, I want to skip to the other two because what Penelope offers is so beautiful. Calypso and Circe both tell Odysseus, we can make you a demigod. We can basically make you, we can give you immortality so you can live forever as my husband. Now, guys, you got to admit, that would be kind of tempting. You get to live forever. You have a supermodel for a wife. You'd have everything provided for you, all the wealth and food and all the pleasures. But Odysseus says no to both Calypso. Remember what Calypso means? I will hide. To the hider and to the deceiver. Why does Odysseus say no to them, but yes to getting back home to Penelope? Well, what Penelope can offer him is a kind of immortality that is better and broader and deeper and more enriching and satisfying than just having someone feed grapes to you. Penelope can offer to him a progeny. What do I mean by that? Well, they already have a son. They have the son Telemachus. And Odysseus has the opportunity of a lifetime. And I can tell you, as a father of 5 and a grandfather, yes, I know I don't look old enough to be a grandfather. Hey, watch that. But as a father and a grandfather, I can tell you, it is the opportunity of a lifetime to be given the privilege of pouring yourself into sons and daughters so that they will carry on what the wisdom you taught them, the character you gave them. And even after you are dead and gone, your children, you live through them because they are carrying on your good name. On top of this shelf behind me, I don't want to mess up my camera setup. I'm afraid I'll knock it over. I have a picture at the highest point in my office of my father, who passed away just a few years ago. And he really has been the greatest example of a godly man of character and love and compassion than any other person I've ever known. So every once in a while, I'll do something kind of silly or goofy. My dad's name was Jack, and I named one of my sons after him. My wife will say, "Ha, you're acting just like Jack Eder." And just to get on my wife's nerves, I always say, "Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. No one could give me a better compliment." Because the wisdom and the character that my dad passed on to me, I have the privilege of living living it out very imperfectly, by the way, but also passing it on. You see, friends, that is what Penelope has to offer Odysseus, a family unit, something that'll last for generations to come, something that is way deeper and more profound and more beautiful and way longer lasting than just having someone fan you with one of those big, I don't know, fan things and drinking the drinks with the little umbrellas in them. Yeah, that might be cool and awesome for a short period of time. But Odysseus chooses wisely as he chooses what will bring, and let's do this really quickly. Outline of videos. This is video number 8. So in the next video, be sure you read 17 to 22. What is going to bring about this growth, this maturation that Homer wants to see in Greece? The family unit, generations of people living peaceable lives, loving lives, building character, not just might that leads to violence. Woo! I love this work of literature. It is so beautiful, and we're barely scratching the surface, believe it or not. All right, get your reading done. Next video will be video number 9. I'm having a great time going through the Odyssey with you. See you then, friends.